Welcome to my channel, Crimson Inquiry.
The fog lay thick over Baker Street that autumn evening, muffling the sounds of London's restless streets. Inside 221B, the flicker of gas lamps cast long shadows against the faded wallpaper. It was in this dim light that an urgent visitor arrived, unsettling even the unflappable Holmes Lestrade, recently returned from a harrowing scene in Whitechapel. Bore a peculiar expression, equal parts frustration and unease. "Holmes, Watson, this one defies every explanation we have," he confessed as he removed his damp coat. "An old estate on the edge of the city, Abernathy Hall. The master of the house, young Edward Abernathy, was found dead in his study. The room was locked from the inside, windows bolted, no sign of forced entry. Scotland Yard is convinced it was suicide or accident, but the family insists otherwise." Watson exchanged a glance with Holmes. Locked room mysteries were hardly novel, yet the family's certainty piqued the detective's curiosity. "But there's more," Lestrade continued. "Witnesses speak of strange occurrences, whispers echoing through the halls, the figure of a pale boy glimpsed in the moonlight, and Edward had been tormented by this ghost for weeks before his death." Holmes steepled his fingers, eyes glittering beneath his thick brows. "A ghost, Lestrade? Or merely a man's secret anxieties made manifest in rumor and superstition?" "Precisely why your mind is needed. The official inquiry hits a dead end, and the family fears the shame of any scandal linked to suicide." Holmes rose, smoothing his coat with methodical grace. "Watson, prepare yourself. We take this strange spectre from myth to matter. There is no room for superstition in logic." As they prepared to leave, Holmes paused by the window, his gaze narrowing on a single cinder drifting upward, so unremarkable yet harmless, much like the reputation of a man's shadow in daylight. "Let us see what is hidden behind the ghostly veil." The game, as always, was afoot. The following morning dawned dull and grey, the London fog still clinging stubbornly to the gas lamps along Baker Street, as Holmes and I set out for Abernathy Hall. The cab wound through narrow streets veiled in mist, the city's usual bustle reduced to muffled footsteps and distant thunder. Holmes barely spoke during the journey, eyes fixed on some invisible thread of thought, as if already unraveling the mystery before them. Upon arrival, Abernathy Hall loomed like a faded relic of a more assured era. Its stone facade was scarred by rain and time, windows shuttered against the chill, and the heavy oak doors yawning open to admit a butler whose face betrayed a mixture of solemn duty and weary anxiety. Holmes introduced us tersely, and we were shown firsthand through a succession of grim, velvet-draped halls to the scene of the tragedy, Edward Abernathy's study. The room retained the faint scent of pipe smoke and old paper. Bookshelves lined the walls in meticulous order, while the massive desk remained cluttered with sealed letters and a quill resting beside a half-filled inkpot. Most striking was the heavy oak door, bolted securely from the inside, and the windows, latched with iron fastenings so firmly that even Lestrade's men considered escape or intrusion impossible. The body of the young master had been removed, but everything else remained undisturbed. "Tell me," Holmes began, crouching beside the fireplace where ash still smouldered faintly, "how exactly was the body discovered?" The butler, a solemn man named Greaves, explained carefully, "It was the maid, Miss Ethel, who attended Master Edward last night. She found the door locked and, receiving no answer, fetched me. We had to break in by force at dawn." Inside, he sat slumped in his chair, eyes closed. No sign of struggle. Holmes nodded slowly, eyes scanning each detail, impressions in the carpet, the angle of a tipped chair, and the faintest scuff marks near the hearth. "And the cause of death?" "The physician declared it a sudden heart failure, but rumors persist," Greaves lowered his voice, "that the ghost boy haunted him to madness." Holmes raised an eyebrow. "The ghost boy?" "At times, Master Edward would not sleep. Whispering of a pale child who appeared near the pond at night. Claims dismissed by rational men." "Naturally." Holmes rose and moved to the large window overlooking the fogged gardens. "Watson, one must never discount human fear. It is often the mask of deeper truths." I recorded each detail dutifully, though I must confess the idea of a ghost disturbed the usual rationality that Holmes brought to his work. Yet his demeanor was untouched by superstition. Instead, he seemed invigorated by the challenge, As Holmes inspected the room more closely, his gaze lingered longest on the desk. He lifted a sealed letter, observing the wax seal's impression, a stylized crest, then carefully unfolded the note within. The handwriting was terse, the ink slightly faded. "See here, Watson," Holmes said quietly. "A letter from a solicitor dated the day before the death, warning Edward of a claim against the estate, from a half-brother recently come to London." I glanced at the paper. "A potential heir? That complicates the matter." "Indeed. And yet, no mention of aggression or threats within the letter. This suggests caution, or at least prudence on Edward's part, rather than open hostility." Holmes replaced the letter and turned to me with a rare smile. There is often a truth hidden even in what is left unsaid. He walked to the door and examined the lock bolts, tapping lightly. Locked from inside, no forced entry, and yet a dead man seated as if in contemplation. The puzzle thickens. Lestrade, who had arrived moments before, grunted. "A straightforward verdict of heart failure leaves me cold, Holmes. If there is foul play, the culprit is cunning indeed, perhaps too cunning." Holmes nodded. "And cunning men, Lestrade, often rely on the unseen to cloak their deeds." He turned abruptly to the windowsill, picking up a fragment of thread caught in the latch. "Odd. A single thread of cloth, ripped and snagged, hidden here. Not a detail for the untrained eye, but significant nonetheless." I watched as he scrutinized the color and texture closely. A fine silk dyed an unusual shade of midnight blue, unfamiliar to me in common London attire. "Curious," Holmes murmured. "One might consider the possibility this belongs to our ghost boy, or rather, to a man who would masquerade as such." His words sent a tremor of anticipation through the room. The idea that this spectral figure was no mere apparition, but a man in disguise, was chilling. Yet in Holmes's world, every shadow was cast by a definite cause. Before we could press further, a soft knock interrupted our thoughts. It was Miss Ethel, the maid, summoned to provide additional information. She appeared nervously at the door, clutching a small bundle of tokens she had found near the pond, where Edward reported seeing the ghost. Holmes took the items with delicate care: an old toy wooden soldier, a faded photograph of a young boy, and a piece of torn paper smudged with antiquated ink. "See, Watson," he whispered. "The thread, the tokens, the locked room, all threads of a tapestry deliberately woven by someone wishing us to see a ghost, not a man." The deeper we probed, the more layered the mystery became. Edward Abernathy's death was no accident, no straightforward failure of the heart. It was a tale composed in shadows, a ghost story deliberately engineered as a veil for something far darker. With Holmes's eyes alight with that unmistakable spark of engagement, we prepared to delve deeper into the secrets of Abernathy Hall, secrets that promised to unravel a story of revenge and deception in equal measure. Holmes studied the faded photograph closely, the image of a small boy, dressed in Victorian finery, with eyes that seemed too knowing for one so young. Edward's words spoke of this child, Watson. But who was he really? Holmes mused aloud, turning the photograph over as if expecting some secret to reveal itself in the back. Miss Ethel, is there any family history regarding a child? Perhaps a forgotten relative or one shrouded in tragedy? Holmes inquired with gentle patience. The maid hesitated, then confessed, "There was mention, sir, of Edward's younger half-brother, Charles. He lived briefly here as a boy, but was taken away after an accident near the pond. The servants say the place has not been the same since." Holmes nodded. "A boy lost to the estate, and perhaps more than memories linger there." He carefully returned the photograph and toy to her. "Thank you, Miss Ethel. Your observations are most valuable." As she left, Holmes turned to me with a thoughtful frown. "A boy known to few but remembered by ghosts of the past. This revenge may well be born of old wounds, Watson." We descended the grand staircase, our footsteps dull against the luxurious rugs. Holmes's mind seemed to whirl faster than his speech could catch, piecing together fragments into something yet unseen. In the drawing room, Lord Abernathy awaited us. A gaunt man with sharp, troubled eyes and the air of one burdened by years of family secrets. He received Holmes with a mix of hope and desperation. "Mr. Holmes, we are grateful for your presence. It is as if a curse haunts this house." Edward spoke often of a pale boy beside the pond. His words grew increasingly fearful until his final day. "We all fear what that means." Holmes fixed Lord Abernathy with a piercing gaze. Fear, my lord, is a powerful force, often the cloak for truths we dare not face. Pray tell me what you have discovered, Lord Abernathy urged. Holmes paced slowly before replying. Edward was troubled, yes, but the evidence suggests that his death was no mere tragedy of the heart. A staged haunting, a locked room, these are deliberate devices to mislead. Then who would wish to deceive us so? Lord Abernathy's voice dropped. And why? Holmes stopped and met his gaze. That, my lord, is the heart of the matter. There are those who would seek inheritance by any means, even by the veil of superstition. Later, as evening shadows deepened, Holmes and I explored the gardens, moving toward the pond that seemed at the center of Edward's torment. The air was still, the fog curling low. The water's surface reflected distorted images as we approached the spot described by the servants. Holmes knelt, inspecting the ground closely. Traces of footprints, faint but telling. See here, Watson, 2 sets, one large, one small. The larger lead away from the house. The smaller circle back, as if a child afraid yet unwilling to leave. Suddenly, Holmes reached into the muddy bank, retrieving a finely crafted cufflink, its silver surface engraved with an ornate C. He turned it over thoughtfully. Charles, he murmured. Not merely a memory, but a piece of the puzzle left behind. As Holmes pocketed the cufflink, a rustle from the nearby thicket startled us. We both turned sharply, but only shadows greeted our gaze. The ghost boy, imagined or real, seemed to linger not merely in stories, but in physical clues left scattered across the estate. Returning indoors, Holmes contemplated the estate's records, and Edward's correspondence scattered across the library. Among these, an unsigned note caught his eye, written hastily in charcoal ink. Revenge is born of silence. His face darkened. A message from the living or the dead, Watson. Silence in a family's past often hides a multitude of sins. As the night deepened, the threads of the mystery tightened. Holmes's mind raced against time, not merely to solve a locked-room death, but to unveil the hidden dramas of a family haunted by grief and masked deceit. In that hour, I realized that beneath the ghostly talking and family whispers lay a carefully orchestrated plot, one that Holmes alone could unravel through reason, observation, and an unyielding pursuit of truth. The ghost boy was no longer a mere spectre of fear, but a symbol of a revenge that must be understood. Before it claimed another life, the sea next morning brought with it a certain crispness to the air, a hint of frost that settled stubbornly upon the curled leaves in the garden, as if nature itself wished to freeze time around Abernathy Hall. Holmes was already engrossed in a letter, sitting atop the dining table, his fine fingers tracing the inked lines as if they conjured voices long silenced. Lestrade had returned with news, a report from the local apothecary who had examined Edward's personal effects and, more notably, a vial found hidden within a false panel of the desk. The contents were a faint yellow liquid, peculiar in scent and composition. Holmes examined the vial beneath the lamplight with his customary intensity. Poison, Watson, but not an ordinary tincture. This is a slow-acting cardiotoxin, used only in the most secretive circles, nearly untraceable in its effects. Is it likely Edward was given this surreptitiously? I asked, aghast at the sinister turn. Holmes nodded slowly. Poison administered to simulate natural death, meticulously planned, as one would expect from a man intent on veiling murder behind the shroud of misfortune. Our gaze shifted toward the locked study door as Holmes continued his scrutiny. The locked room scenario aligns perfectly with a subtle domestic treachery. The toxin was administered earlier, while Edward remained among those he trusted, or at least did not suspect. His eyes gleamed with renewed vigor. The key question is, who had access and motive? Lord Abernathy appeared, summoned once more. Holmes wasted no time in questioning him regarding the household's recent comings and goings, attentively noting the Lord's guarded manner and quick evasions when asked about certain individuals. There were 3 constant companions of my son in recent weeks, Lord Abernathy revealed hesitantly. Mr. Alistair Crowe, a distant cousin with a shadowed past, Miss Caroline Elwood, Edward's childhood companion who had recently come into some fortune, and Dr. Mortimer, family physician and trusted confidant. Holmes paused thoughtfully. A mixed company. All had the opportunity to administer such a toxin, intentionally or otherwise. He pulled a small notebook from his coat pocket. "What do you know of these persons' interests or grievances against Edward?" Lord Abernathy's brows furrowed as if burdened by doubts, yet he spoke frankly. Crowe was often at odds with Edward over the estate's legacy. He felt cheated out of his portion. Caroline Elwood sought to protect the family name, but some whispered her intentions were not entirely pure. "Dr. Mortimer, I have always trusted him implicitly." Holmes folded the notebook with deliberate care. "And yet," he intoned, "trust is often misplaced among the closest of allies." Our next step was clear. Holmes insisted on interviews with all three, beginning with Alistair Crowe, a man of imposing stature and sharp features. Crowe greeted us coolly in the dimly lit drawing room, his voice smooth but edged with impatience. "Mr. Holmes, what would you have of me? I am but a concerned relative drawn into a maelstrom of baseless accusations." Holmes fixed him with a piercing gaze. "Mr. Crowe, tell me of your last interactions with Edward Abernathy, words spoken, meetings held, and any disagreements that might have soured your relations." Crowe's eyes flickered. "Edward was a stubborn man, often dismissing my claims to the estate. We quarrelled, yes, but never to the extent of wishing him harm." Holmes's voice was measured. "And yet quarrel and malice are fertile soil for darker deeds. Where were you on the night of his death?" Crowe's lips pressed tightly. "At the Black Swan pub with witnesses aplenty. Moreover, I disdain trickery, preferring open conflict to shadows and poisons." Holmes's gaze didn't waver. "We shall see." Next came Caroline Elwood, radiant yet guarded, seated elegantly with a feigned calmness that seemed to mask deeper tensions. "Miss Elwood," Holmes began, "you appear deeply invested in the Abernathy legacy. Was this affection purely familial, or did other interests bind you to Edward?" Caroline's eyes narrowed slightly. "I cared for Edward, yes, but there were matters of reputation and survival at stake. Our family name must remain unblemished, whatever the cost." Holmes nodded, sensing the undercurrents. "And your whereabouts on the night in question?" "Attending a charity event in Kensington, one that several can attest to," she replied, her voice steady. Holmes studied her intently. "You mentioned whatever the cost. Could that cost have extended to a desperate act?" Caroline's gaze hardened, but she said nothing. Finally, "We met Dr. Mortimer, a man whose gentle demeanor belied a shrewd intelligence that Holmes seemed to appraise with particular interest. Doctor, your position afforded you both access and trust. Do you deny any involvement in Mr. Abernathy's death?" "I deny it vehemently," Mortimer responded, his hands steady. "Edward's health was always of grave concern to me. Poison would be anathema to everything I stand for." Holmes observed the doctor's steady eyes and calm voice. "Yet intent and action may diverge. Pray tell me of your medical visits that day." Mortimer produced detailed notes. "I saw Edward briefly in the morning. His pulse was irregular but stable. The afternoon I was called away by urgent cases. No chance to administer anything." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "A precise alibi, though allowance for shadowed moments remains. As we left Abernathy Hall that evening, the threads of suspicion wove ever tighter. The false masks worn by pride, jealousy, and protection of family secrets threatened to choke the truth." Holmes was silent, lost in the calculus of motives, timings, and subtle contradictions. Back at Baker Street, Holmes recalled the phrase from the unsigned note, "Revenge is born of silence." It echoed in his mind, a key to the labyrinth. Somewhere within the quiet, concealed past of Abernathy Hall lay the final catalyst for murder, a secret voice waiting to be heard. For now, the ghost boy remained a silent sentinel, an emblem of revenge that stretched beyond the grave, its true message yet to be unveiled. The next morning brought with it a certain crispness to the air, a hint of frost that settled stubbornly upon the curled leaves in the garden, as if nature itself wished to freeze time around Abernathy Hall. Holmes was already engrossed in a letter, sitting atop the dining table, his fine fingers tracing the inked lines as if they conjured voices long silenced. Lestrade had returned with news, a report from the local apothecary who had examined Edward's personal effects and, more notably, a vial found hidden within a false panel of the desk. The contents were a faint yellow liquid, peculiar in scent and composition. Holmes examined the vial beneath the lamplight with his customary intensity. "Poison, Watson, but not an ordinary tincture. This is a slow-acting cardiotoxin, used only in the most secretive circles, nearly untraceable in its effects. Is it likely Edward was given this surreptitiously? I asked, aghast at the sinister turn. Holmes nodded slowly. Poison administered to simulate natural death, meticulously planned, as one would expect from a man intent on veiling murder behind the shroud of misfortune. Our gaze shifted toward the locked study door as Holmes continued his scrutiny. The locked room scenario aligns perfectly with a subtle domestic treachery. The toxin was administered earlier, while Edward remained among those he trusted, or at least did not suspect. His eyes gleamed with renewed vigor. The key question is, who had access and motive? Lord Abernathy appeared, summoned once more. Holmes wasted no time in questioning him regarding the household's recent comings and goings, attentively noting the Lord's guarded manner and quick evasions when asked about certain individuals. Holmes folded the notebook with deliberate care. And yet, he intoned, trust is often misplaced among the closest of allies. Our next step was clear. Holmes insisted on interviews with all three, beginning with Alistair Crowe, a man of imposing stature and sharp features. Crowe greeted us coolly in the dimly lit drawing room, his voice smooth but edged with impatience. "Mr. Holmes, what would you have of me? I am but a concerned relative drawn into a maelstrom of baseless accusations." Holmes fixed him with a piercing gaze. "Mr. Crowe, tell me of your last interactions with Edward Abernathy. Words spoken, meetings held, and any disagreements that might have soured your relations." Crowe's eyes flickered. "Edward was a stubborn man, often dismissing my claims to the estate. We quarrelled, yes, but never to the extent of wishing him harm." Holmes's voice was measured. "And yet quarrel and malice are fertile soil for darker deeds. Where were you on the night of his death?" Crowe's lips pressed tightly. "At the Black Swan pub with witnesses aplenty. Moreover, I disdain trickery, preferring open conflict to shadows and poisons." Holmes' gaze didn't waver. "We shall see." Next came Caroline Elwood, radiant yet guarded, seated elegantly with a feigned calmness that seemed to mask deeper tensions. "Miss Elwood," Holmes began, "you appear deeply invested in the Abernathy legacy. Was this affection purely familial, or did other interests bind you to Edward?" Caroline's eyes narrowed slightly. "I cared for Edward, yes, but there were matters of reputation and survival at stake. Our family name must remain unblemished, whatever the cost." Holmes nodded, sensing the undercurrents. "And your whereabouts on the night in question?" "Attending a charity event in Kensington, one that several can attest to," she replied, her voice steady. Holmes studied her intently. "You mentioned whatever the cost. Could that cost have extended to a desperate act?" Caroline's gaze hardened, but she said nothing. Finally, "We met Dr. Mortimer, a man whose gentle demeanor belied a shrewd intelligence that Holmes seemed to appraise with particular interest. Doctor, your position afforded you both access and trust. Do you deny any involvement in Mr. Abernathy's death?" "I deny it vehemently," Mortimer responded, his hands steady. "Edward's health was always of grave concern to me. Poison would be anathema to everything I stand for." Holmes observed the doctor's steady eyes and calm voice. "Yet intent and action may diverge. Pray tell me of your medical visits that day." Mortimer produced detailed notes. "I saw Edward briefly in the morning. His pulse was irregular but stable. The afternoon I was called away by urgent cases. No chance to administer anything." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "A precise alibi, though allowance for shadowed moments remains. As we left Abernathy Hall that evening, the threads of suspicion wove ever tighter. The false masks worn by pride, jealousy, and protection of family secrets threatened to choke the truth." Holmes was silent, lost in the calculus of motives, timings, and subtle contradictions. Back at Baker Street, Holmes recalled the phrase from the unsigned note, "Revenge is born of silence." It echoed in his mind, a key to the labyrinth. Somewhere within the quiet, concealed past of Abernathy Hall lay the final catalyst for murder, a secret voice waiting to be heard. For now, the ghost boy remained a silent sentinel, an emblem of revenge that stretched beyond the grave, its true message yet to be unveiled. The following day, Holmes directed his attention toward the estate's archives, a dusty collection of ledgers, letters, and faded portraits tucked away in a locked cabinet beneath the grandeur of Abernathy Hall's library. With Greaves's reluctant assistance, we sifted through the chronicles of a family steeped in both privilege and tangled secrets. Holmes' fingers brushed over the brittle edges of an old diary. The leather cracked and worn from decades of concealment. "Watson, observe this," Holmes murmured, flipping through the delicate pages with reverence. This diary belonged to Mary Abernathy, Edward's mother, and much missed by the family. Within these entries lies the key to the silence that breeds revenge. As the daylight waned, Holmes read aloud, his voice low with concentrated care. The diary recounted the tragic story of Charles Abernathy, the boy seen in the ghostly photograph, a child whose life was cut short by a drowning near the estate pond years before Edward's birth. The entries hinted at a heartbroken mother, hiding dark whispers of foul play surrounding Charles's death. Though no accusation was overt, the family's silence about Charles's death is deafening, Holmes observed when he finished. An event veiled in sorrow yet never duly investigated. He looked toward me, eyes sharp. If Edward believed that his brother's end was no accident, he would have reason to fear those who wished to keep this truth buried. Holmes's thoughts turned immediately to the trio we had questioned, the cousin Crow, the companion Elwood, and the Dr. Mortimer. Each had potential motives obscured by social niceties and feigned respect. Revenge is indeed birthed in silence. "Watson," Holmes said softly. Our next visit was to the servants' quarters, where Holmes sought to unravel the day-to-day rhythms of the household. There he questioned the cook and the gardener, individuals whose modest positions often concealed sharp observations. Any unusual movements, strange visitors, or secret meetings? Holmes asked the gardener, a wiry man with a keen eye. The gardener nodded slowly. "Aye, Master Holmes. I saw Miss Elwood walking near the pond late at night a few times, carrying something small wrapped in cloth." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "And what of Mr. Crow?" "Well, sir, he had a habit of arguing with Edward. Heard loud voices one evening from the study window, but no one knows what was said." Holmes turned to me with a faint smile. "Every fragment matters." Later, Holmes requested to speak privately with Miss Ethel, the maid who had first discovered Edward's body. In the solitude of the servants' hallway, Holmes's voice lowered. "Miss Ethel, tell me plainly, did you truly see the ghost boy as the family claims?" The young woman's eyes shone with earnest fear. "I don't know if it was the ghost, sir, but I saw someone there by the pond, wearing a dark cloak and a small boy's cap, looking like the photographs. They vanished before I could approach." Holmes considered this carefully. A cloaked figure, then, a person, not a spectre. Someone using the child's image to haunt the household. Our investigation began to converge on a startling conclusion. The ghost boy was a carefully crafted illusion, wielded as a weapon of psychological torment. But to whose end? Returning to 221B that evening, Holmes outlined his strategy. We must draw out this person, force their hand. Only then will we discern the full purpose of their deadly game. Holmes revealed a plan to stage a controlled glimpse of the ghost boy near the pond, using a clever device and a willing accomplice, disguised in period attire. If the figure appeared again, we would be ready to catch the puppet master behind the phantasm. Just as true justice requires reason over fear, Holmes added wryly, so must we wield illusion to trap deception. The following night, we returned to Abernathy Hall, concealed in shadow beneath the ancient trees. Holmes's accomplice slipped silently through the mist, cloaked and masked in the guise of the fabled boy's ghost. Minutes passed like hours as we waited, breath held and nerves taut. Then from the fog drifted a figure, quiet, deliberate, approaching the pond's edge with cautious steps. The moon caught a glimpse of the familiar silhouette, the small cap, the cloak fluttering ghost-like in the chill. Holmes whispered to me, "Now, Watson." At his signal, a faint light shone suddenly upon the figure, who reared back in startled surprise. Swift hands emerged, and before the figure could vanish again into the mist, Holmes and I closed the distance. The cloak was pulled aside to reveal a face both familiar and unexpected. It was none other than Alistair Crow himself. Crow's eyes burned with frantic desperation. "You have no proof," he hissed, but the weight of our presence quelled his defiance. Holmes's tone was sharp, unwavering. "Mr. Crow, your masquerade as a ghost boy, an innocent victim, is a gambit of guilt. Confess your purpose behind tormenting the household and administering poison to Edward Abernathy." Broken and cornered, Crow's shoulders sagged, and he confessed to a scheme of vengeance both bitter and slow. a twisted attempt to avenge the years lost with his brother Charles, whom he blamed on the Abernathy family's neglect and silence. "I would see them suffer for the boy's death," Crow admitted, voice heavy with regret mixed with rage. "The ghost was my mask. Poison my instrument." As dawn crept across the estate, the mystery found its grim resolution. Yet the story of the ghost boy lingered, a haunting reminder of secrets that fester when left unspoken, and the lengths to which men will go to force silent truths into the light. As dawn broke over Abernathy Hall, a pale light seeped into the grand corridors, casting elongated shadows that seemed to retreat from the truth at the edges of the estate. Holmes, somber yet resolute, stood by the window, gazing out over the overgrown garden where Crow had been taken into custody. The ghostly illusion that had haunted the estate, crafted through cunning deception and darker motives, had been unveiled, but at a cost that weighed heavily on all involved. The morning's revelations stirred a quiet tumult within the household. Though outwardly the staff moved with subdued composure, each person burdened by truths long suppressed. Holmes nodded at Lestrade, who stood quietly to one side, verifying the final arrangements for Crow's arrest. I approached Holmes as he tucked away a small folded parchment, the final confession Crow had unwittingly dictated in his distress. "Holmes, I cannot help but wonder," I said softly. "What drove Crow to such lengths? Was it merely revenge, or was there something more? An ancestral curse, perhaps, long buried in silence?" Holmes turned, eyes reflecting a spark of both weariness and satisfaction. "Revenge, Watson, is never lonely. Crow's actions were born of prolonged grievance, a sense of injustice over Charles's death, compounded by the family's silence. But the true motive is always more layered. It often involves fear, betrayal, and the desperate need to rewrite a history written in blood and lies." He paused, then added, "The ghost was a tool, a phantasm conjured from his own torment, a mirror of his buried rage. It was designed to terrify, to make the family complicit in their silence, to harvest revenge from the shadows." The estate's head steward, a tall, stooped man who had served the Abernathy family for decades, entered quietly. "Sir," he said, voice trembling slightly, "Miss Ethel wishes to see you. She says she has remembered something she saw the night before Edward's death." Holmes bade him lead the way. We found Ethel seated in the breakfast parlour, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and certainty, she clutching a small knot of fabric, part of the cloak Crow had worn that night. "Miss Ethel," Holmes said gently, "what have you remembered?" She drew a trembling breath. "I saw him, Sir, Crow. He slipped out from behind the trees near the pond, cloaked and hurried. I thought it strange then, but he looked guilty. He was holding something, a small box or case, and he whispered to himself before vanishing into the dark." Holmes pondered this, then nodded sharply. "That confirms much. Crow's actions were not merely driven by hatred, but also by a dark secret tied to Charles. His obsession with revenge was fueled by the burden of unspoken guilt and history, secrets that finally surfaced after all these years." Holmes quietly instructed the steward to ensure Ethel's safety, then turned back to me with an air of grim satisfaction. "Now, Watson, we need to revisit the critical pieces, those whispers, those hidden truths buried beneath layers of silence. They led us here, to this moment of reckoning." That afternoon, Holmes requested access to the estate's deepest records, including family papers and legal documents. With painstaking patience, he uncovered a long-forgotten will. A will that had been altered by the family patriarch, concealing Charles's true fate and entombing a dark chapter of betrayal. The original document indicated that Charles died in a tragic accident, but the amended clause, possibly forged, placed the blame squarely on an unnamed servant, silencing the true story forever. Holmes examined the forged signature meticulously. "The handwriting is an elaborate forgery," he said, "but it aligns with Crow's own script, betraying his involvement in covering the child's death. His aim was to erase the past, to destroy any evidence tying him to the tragedy or to the subsequent cover-up." He paced around the room, the gears turning visibly behind his sharp mind. And when the years passed, the bottled-up guilt turned into rage, which Crow channeled into his son's torment, using the guise of the ghost boy, the poison, the silent revenge, before finally revealing himself beneath the guise of a spectral phantom. Thus, Holmes concluded softly, Crow sought not only revenge but redemption, an attempt to undo the wrongs he believed the family had inflicted upon his brother. and in doing so, nearly destroyed himself and others in the process. Night had fallen when Holmes, having assembled all the evidence, called for the household to gather in the grand hall. The suspects, witnesses, and staff assembled, as Holmes recounted the intricate narrative he had woven from the clues, the poison, the hidden documents, the false ghost, and Crow's confession. He emphasized how every false lead, every misdirection, had been part of Crow's elaborate design. His way of ensuring the truth was a layer beneath deception, waiting to be uncovered by reason and persistence. As Holmes delivered the final summary, how Crow's deep-seated guilt and obsession with justice had driven him to act, and laid out the evidence that proved Crow's culpability. The room was silent, weighed down by the gravity of the revelation. Crow's execution, Holmes said quietly, will serve as a reminder that the past, no matter how deeply buried, always seeks its reckoning. But it also affirms that truth, however shrouded in silence, can only be uncovered by those willing to listen to what the shadows whisper. The authorities took Crow into custody, and as dawn crept wearily across the estate, Holmes and I stood outside contemplating the quiet aftermath. Holmes turned away from the house towards Baker Street, a faint smile touching his lips. "Watson," he said softly, "every silence has a voice, and every ghost a story. Our job is merely to listen, and to understand that truth is always a matter of deduction, never superstition." With that, Holmes began to walk, the wheels of reason turning once more, and the shadows of Abernathy Hall receding into stories of silence finally broken. Back in the quiet of 221B Baker Street, the familiar atmosphere of well-worn books and lingering pipe smoke greeted Holmes and me as we settled after the taxing days at Abernathy Hall. The case, though ostensibly resolved with Crow's confession and arrest, left Holmes distant and contemplative, eyes fixed on an old, fading map of London spread across the table, as if searching for a hidden path only he could see. "Watson," Holmes said after a long pause, "this affair impresses upon me the mutable nature of human guilt and deception. Yet I suspect the story of the ghost boy contains layers not fully unearthed. Crow's confession resolves the present act, but before closure, we must be certain no stone remains unturned." I nodded, aware that Holmes was referring to the deeper motives and accomplices that often lurk in such familial tragedies. Holmes's mind, ever methodical, proposed revisiting the individuals connected to the Abernathy estate once more, not as mere suspects, but as witnesses to the subtler truths Crow might have left behind. Our first visit was to Dr. Mortimer, whose presence during Crow's confession was notably absent, yet whose insights into the family's medical and mental history were invaluable. Dr. Mortimer met us in his modest consulting room, a space adorned with medical texts and careful notes. His expression was grave rather than defensive, a man burdened by loyalty and unspoken worries. "Holmes, what brings you here again?" Mortimer asked, rubbing his hands thoughtfully. "Doctor, your observations of Edward's health and disposition are crucial," Holmes responded. "I would understand better the mental state of our victim in his final weeks," Mortimer sighed. Edward was a troubled soul more than the public knew. The pressure upon him was immense, not merely from external claimants but from something deeper, haunted perhaps by his brother's shadow. Holmes leaned forward. "You suggest the ghost boy was more than a legend spun by servants?" Mortimer nodded. Edward spoke often of restless nights, whispering of a pale figure near the pond, though he shied from discussing it openly. Whether spectral or psychological, it gripped him with dread. Holmes's gaze sharpened. "And Crow's recent behavior, do you think he truly acted alone in orchestrating the torment and murder?" The doctor hesitated, then said quietly, "There are whispers of manipulation, others who stood to gain indirectly. Miss Caroline Elwood, for instance, was too intertwined with the family's affairs to remain uninvolved." With that lead, Holmes and I visited Caroline. Her composure was noticeably less assured than before, a subtle cloak of unease clouding her features. The conversation assumed a more direct tone. "Miss Elwood," Holmes began carefully, "your ties to the Abernathy legacy are complex. Do you deny any involvement in Crow's actions or intentions?" Caroline's eyes flickered with defiance. "I seek only to protect what is left of the family name. Crow's methods were reckless and cruel, but his motives stem from truths I have long wished buried. Yet it seems," Holmes pressed, that you and Crow shared knowledge unknown to others, a plan perhaps to leverage the Ghost Boy's legend to influence inheritance and control. Caroline lowered her gaze. I admit to knowledge, but not to conspiracy. Crow acted out of passion. I counseled caution. The family's silence was a pact of survival as much as shame. Holmes nodded thoughtfully. An uneasy alliance, then, complicated by fear and resentment. We next sought out several of the household staff, including Miss Ethel, who now appeared more relaxed, her initial fear giving way to resolute clarity. Her accounts, combined with newly revealed testimonies, painted a picture of subtle surveillance and growing paranoia within the estate's walls, whispers carried in shadowed corridors, secret meetings by night. Holmes pieced together a pattern. The haunting and poison were tools in a prolonged power struggle, a drama enacted in silence and deception. Yet the true skeletons lay buried, not in the present conflicts, but in a confluence of past sins and cover-ups. Returning to Baker Street, Holmes dedicated himself to the documents acquired from Abernathy Hall, legal papers, wills and letters carefully preserved but overlooked. He discovered discrepancies in land grants and financial transactions, suggesting that even after Charles's death, the family's fortune had been encumbered by corrupt deals and betrayal. The story, Holmes asserted, was far from over. Crow's dangerous actions were but one chapter in a lineage of concealed treacheries. That night, Holmes sat by the fire, pipe in hand, pondering the web that stretched beyond the immediate case. Watson, the ghost boy, Charles, was not merely the victim of a drowning or a cover-up, but a symbol of fractured loyalties that transcend generations. I asked, "Do you suspect other players in this somber game?" Holmes nodded. "Indeed. The map before me shows more than London streets. It charts the maze of human motives and alliances. I propose we return to Abernathy Hall to confront these shadows, to request audience with Lord Abernathy himself." The next morning we made our way back once more. Lord Abernathy was expectant but guarded. Holmes laid bare the evolving narrative that the family's history was riddled with secrets that, left undone, invited tragedy. "There is a power in truth, my lord," Holmes said gently. "The silence that allowed a boy to die unjustly now threatens the entire family." Lord Abernathy's countenance shifted, a mixture of remorse and resolution. "You are right, Mr. Holmes. It is time the Abernathy family faced its past. No matter the cost, with Holmes's guidance, the household began to prepare for a fuller reckoning, an unveiling of truths long kept in shadow. The case of the ghost boy was transforming from a tale of revenge into a profound meditation on family, guilt, and the indomitable search for justice. The deeper layers beckoned, promising that the final resolution was yet to come, waiting beyond the fog and fear that had long clouded Abernathy Hall's halls. The days that followed marked a slow peeling away of the Gordian knot binding Abernathy Hall's dark legacies. Holmes worked with relentless focus, guiding Lord Abernathy and his closest confidants through discussions once unthinkable, confronting painful truths, unmasking long-held secrets, and acknowledging the toll of silence. The estate, too, seemed to breathe anew, shrouded less in the fog of whispered fears. One afternoon, Holmes and I returned to examine the pond itself, now a centerpiece in the unfolding revelation. The afternoon sun cupped the glassy water. The tendrils of mist, finally, dissipated to reveal footprints etched faintly in the soft earth near its banks, marks missed by previous investigators, but seized upon by Holmes with his characteristic precision. As he bent closer, Holmes's eyes caught a delicate imprint among the larger prints he had noticed before, a small, tremulous pattern of bare toes pressed into the damp soil. He traced the delicate shape with his finger, murmuring, "This is no ghost's mark, Watson. It is the imprint of a child, wet, hesitant, and very recent." "Recent? But the boy Charles has long since passed," I replied, puzzled. Holmes's gaze intensified. "Precisely why this is of interest. Someone has returned to this place, deliberately invoking the ghost boy's image not as a spectre, but as a living message, a challenge." Our attention then turned to the surrounding undergrowth, where we discovered faint scratches upon the bark of an ancient willow, almost indecipherable initials carved deeply. C.A. Undoubtedly Charles Abernathy's, Holmes noted thoughtfully. A direct, defiant claim upon memory and place. Returning indoors, Holmes was drawn once more to the correspondence and recently discovered notebooks belonging to Caroline Elwood, whose guarded demeanor seemed to thaw with the passage of truth. Holmes engaged Caroline in private, his tone measured but probing. "Miss Elwood, I understand now that your involvement surpassed mere protection of the family name. Pray reveal all you know of those who may be attempting to further unsettle this place." Caroline sighed. "You see, Mr. Holmes, Crow's confession did not close every door. There are forces, others who walked in shadows, motivated by revenge, ambition, or darker purposes. I have suspected for some time that Edward's death was but a crescendo in a longer, cruel symphony." She revealed private letters she had intercepted, hinting at clandestine meetings and cryptic references to renewed claims upon the estate, guarded by anonymous figures speaking in code. Holmes's eyes shone brighter with the flame of the hunt. "We must act swiftly. A new player has entered the stage, lurking in the dim corridors of Abernathy Hall's troubled past." That evening, Holmes and I conferred at length, plotting a course that would draw out this shadowy antagonist. We resolved to utilize the familiar terrain of the estate, its known secrets, and recent discoveries to set a trap that would compel the unseen hand to manifest. Our plan involved deploying subtle signals among the staff, fabricating a discovery of further incriminating evidence linked to the Ghost Boy legend. Broadcasted with carefully placed urgency, Holmes believed the unknown figure would be compelled to intervene, eager to protect their concealed agenda. Over the following nights, we watched alongside trusted servants, waiting patiently beneath the watchful boughs of the estate's ancient trees. Each evening was thick with anticipation, the kind that sharpened the senses and showcased Holmes's undeterred resolve. One evening, as the moon settled high above, a figure emerged from the mist, a silhouette cloaked, moving cautiously near the pond. This time it was no broad-shouldered man, but a smaller frame, slipping silently beneath the branches. Holmes exchanged a swift glance with me, signaling to remain still. The figure reached the willow, producing a small bundle wrapped tightly, which was laid carefully at the foot of the tree. After a moment's pause, the figure vanished as silently as it had appeared. Our pursuit was methodical. We found the bundle, an assortment of old letters, photographs, and a curious relic, a finely wrought locket engraved with a crest familiar to the Abernathy lineage. Holmes examined the locket under the gaslight's glow. "This is no ordinary token, Watson. It belonged to a woman who vanished from the Abernathy records, Eliza, the estranged wife of the elder Abernathy, and Charles's mother. The discovery added a new dimension to the mystery, a forgotten lineage, hidden not only from the estate, but from history itself." Holmes hypothesized that the recent disturbances were part of a concerted effort to reclaim rights, identities and grievances that time had nearly erased. Armed with this revelation, we summoned Lord Abernathy to confront him with the locket and letters. His reaction was swift but pained, a mixture of recognition and regret. "Yes," he admitted quietly, "Eliza was cast out before my time, her existence officially erased from our annals. But her bloodline runs through us all, secrets that should never have been kept," Holmes pressed gently. "And you suspect the recent actions, the haunting, the poisonings, may be the work of descendants or allies seeking restitution?" Lord Abernathy nodded gravely. "I fear so. This estate's peace will only return when all shadows have been confronted." As the night wore on, Holmes orchestrated further investigations, enlisting new allies among the Abernathy staff and external experts. He maintained unyielding vigilance, piecing together fragments of forgotten histories and modern cunning. The mystery deepened, no longer a story of a ghost boy's revenge alone, but a sprawling tale of obscured identities, fractured families, and the enduring power of silence. In the stillness of Baker Street, as Holmes prepared for the next phase of the investigation, he mused aloud, "The deeper we delve, Watson, the clearer it becomes that the truth is as layered as the fog that clings to London streets. Each revelation births new questions, each shadow a challenge to our reason." I could only marvel at his unflagging determination, knowing that this case, the ghost boy, the poisoned heir, and the tangled Abernathy legacy, was far from its conclusion. And so, with the locket's weight heavy in our pockets and the promise of newfound secrets ahead, we awaited the next move in a game where every whisper, every shadow, and every ghost might yet unveil a deeper truth. The days that followed were steeped in quiet anticipation, the kind that fills the air before a long-held secret is pried open. Holmes and I returned to Abernathy Hall with renewed purpose, carrying with us the locket and the trove of letters that had stirred a sleeping giant within the family archives. Upon arrival, the estate seemed to surrender itself to our investigation, its stately facade belying the turbulent currents beneath. Holmes requested a private audience with Lord Abernathy, while I took the opportunity to familiarize myself once more with the sprawling grounds, now touched with the first hints of winter's frost. Inside the grand library, Holmes and the Lord pored over the letters and documents, their discussion low but charged with meaning. The locket, it appeared, was a symbol not just of lineage but of silenced voices and erased histories. Eliza Abernathy, once cast from the family, had left behind descendants whose existence twisted the neat narrative the family had long tried to preserve. Holmes, Lord Abernathy said after a moment's reflection, the family's silence was born out of shame and fear. To acknowledge Eliza and her progeny would unravel the carefully constructed place we occupy in society. Yet the truth now demands recognition, Holmes nodded gravely. The pursuit of truth is seldom without consequence, my lord, but it is the only sure foundation upon which justice must be built. Meanwhile, the servants whispered of strange happenings, furtive movements at dusk, mysterious letters slipping under doors, and glimpses of figures cloaked in darkness. The ghost boy legend, once relegated to the realm of superstition, had grown tangible once again, no longer the design of a single man but a manifestation of deeper unrest. One evening, as Holmes and I returned to our quarters at the estate, we found a waiting letter, delivered anonymously and penned in a delicate hand. The message was cryptic yet unmistakable. The past and present collide where the waters run deepest. Seek where Charles named his refuge. Holmes' eyes gleamed with the thrill of the chase. A new clue, Watson. A summons from the shadows themselves. The pond is no longer merely a site of memory, but the locus of something yet undiscovered. That night, under a moon veiled by drifting clouds, Holmes and I ventured once more to the pond's edge, armed with lanterns and a keen resolve. The water's surface shimmered coldly, reflecting the skeletal branches of the trees above. Holmes surveyed the ground carefully, noticing where the soft earth was disturbed. "There, near the old willow," he whispered, "a hollow beneath the roots, concealed but accessible." With some effort, we unearthed a small wooden box, aged and weathered. Inside lay a collection of artifacts, a faded locket, a bundle of letters tied with frayed ribbon, and a small, hand-carved whistle. Holmes examined each item with meticulous care, recognizing the significance immediately. "These are relics of Charles, a secret cache, perhaps left by Eliza or another custodian of the Abernathy truth." The letters unveiled a correspondence between Eliza and an unknown confidant, revealing her desperate attempts to protect her son from the reach of those who would harm him, the family patriarch among them. The tone spoke of betrayal and sorrow, but also hope and resilience. "The whistle," Holmes murmured. Could it be a signal, a call to an ally, or a warning against pursuit? As we returned indoors, Holmes's mind was clearly racing. "Watson, the plot expands. We must prepare for a confrontation, not only with those who have acted, but with the secrets that remain hidden, threatening to resurface with greater force." Lord Abernathy agreed to cooperate fully, opening the household to further scrutiny and promising transparency that had once been unimaginable. In the days that followed, Holmes coordinated discreet inquiries among the staff and local villagers, tracing elusive footsteps and piecing together the network that had sustained the Abernathy silences. The picture was one of quiet resilience, a lineage of protectors and rebels, bound by blood and burdened by secrecy. Yet even as the truth emerged, the atmosphere thickened with unresolved tension. The ghost boy legend had transformed from myth to cautionary tale, a signpost of the dangers that lie in unspoken grievances. At Baker Street, Holmes reflected aloud, "We are close to the heart of this mystery, Watson. The layers of family, history, and vengeance intertwine still, but the truth grows clearer. Soon all shadows shall be brought into the light." With the pieces aligning, the stage was set for a final unveiling, one that promised to challenge not only the Abernathy family, but the very fabric of their legacy. and the fragile peace of the estate itself. The chill of early winter settled deep within Abernathy Hall's stone walls, yet within the drawing room a fire crackled warmly, its glow flickering across the faces gathered in anxious anticipation. Holmes stood near the hearth, eyes alight with the keen intelligence that seemed to shine brightest amidst the evening's shadows. The assembled family members, servants and a few trusted officials from Scotland Yard awaited the final reckoning, the culmination of threads drawn taut by months of careful deduction. Holmes cleared his throat, his voice resonating with the quiet authority that commanded attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have journeyed far through shadows and silence, but tonight that silence shall be broken." He paced slowly, pausing to meet the eyes of each listener. The death of Edward Abernathy was not the result of mere misfortune nor spectral hauntings, but of human design, an act born of bitterness, long-held grievances, and the desperate desire to rewrite a narrative carefully constructed over generations. He gestured toward the letters and relics displayed upon the table, the locket of Eliza Abernathy, the aged correspondence, and the wooden box recovered from the pond. These items tell a story of a woman, Eliza, once cast aside by her own family, whose son Charles suffered a tragic and untimely death, one veiled by silence and concealment. Holmes turned to Lord Abernathy. "My lord, the alterations made to the family's records and the forged will extended the legacy of that silence, creating wounds that festered unseen. The recent disturbances, the shadow of the ghost boy, were not mere superstition, but a carefully crafted manifestation of revenge by one who bore the weight of these silences." A hush fell over the room as Holmes continued. "Alistair Crowe sought to avenge Charles's death, using poison and fear to unsettle the estate. Yet his actions were enabled and perhaps manipulated by others, driven by ambitions and fears tied to the forgotten past." He cast a deliberate glance toward Caroline Elwood, whose composed demeanor now showed hints of apprehension. "Miss Elwood," Holmes said softly, "you were more than a bystander. Your knowledge of the family's secrets and your covert activities reveal involvement in this shadowed play. Care to explain?" Caroline's voice was steady but tinged with remorse. "I wished only to protect the family reputation, Mr. Holmes, but I admit my actions may have fueled the flames. The ghost boy was a legend I sought to control, not to unleash indiscriminately." Holmes nodded knowingly. "Your intentions, while perhaps understandable, contributed to the despair and danger that overtook this household." He shifted focus back to the gathered company. "This case is not solely about retribution. It is about the cost of secrets and lies, and the necessity of confronting our histories. The silence that surrounded Charles Abernathy's death was the true poison, one that spread until it claimed another life." Lestrade stepped forward, affirming the legal consequences that would follow. Crowe's arrest would proceed, but the broader ramifications for the family's legacy remained under sober examination. Holmes concluded with a reflection on human nature. "We all hold shadows, fears, and sins, but logic and truth have the power to illuminate even the darkest corners. It is only through such light that justice and ultimately peace may be restored." As the assembly dispersed, Lord Abernathy approached Holmes, gratitude mingling with melancholy in his eyes. "I thank you, Mr. Holmes, for lifting the veil from our past, for unearthing this painful truth. I only hope that the Abernathy name may yet find redemption." Holmes inclined his head modestly. "Redemption, my lord, is born not from forgetting, but from acknowledgement and atonement." Back at Baker Street, as the gas lamps glowed softly and the night settled deep over London, Holmes and I reflected on the case's intricacies. Holmes mused, "Watson, the ghost boy was never truly a phantom of the supernatural, but a spectre wrought by human sorrow and vengeance. Our task was to see beyond the smoke and mirrors to the beating heart of truth beneath." I nodded, humbled by the journey from shadow to clarity, keenly aware once more of Holmes's uncanny brilliance in weaving reason into the fabric of mystery. As Holmes prepared to turn his keen mind to yet another case, he offered a final thought, his voice bearing the weight of quiet wisdom. "In every puzzle, Watson, the greatest challenge is to listen, not to ghosts or rumors, but to the silences between the words. For there invariably lies the truth." As the first light of dawn seeped through the fog-shrouded windows of 221B Baker Street, Holmes settled into his favorite armchair, pipe delicately poised between his fingers. The long ordeal of Abernathy Hall had drawn its curtain, but before us lay the final act, the ultimate revelation tying together the strands of mystery, deception, and buried sorrow. "Watson," Holmes began, voice calm but resolute. "The solution must encompass all facets of this intricate design: the locked room, the ghostly apparitions, the poisoned air, and the shadow cast by a boy who vanished long ago." I attended carefully, prepared to assimilate the full measure of his brilliant deduction. Holmes leaned forward, fingers steepled. The locked door was no impervious barrier, but a stage set to mislead. Edward's poisoning, administered through subtle means, accomplished the intended demise without disturbance. Yet it was Crow's masquerade as the ghost boy that sowed fear, fear meant to isolate and disorient. He paused, eyes narrowing in thought. But the true masterstroke lies elsewhere. Crow was driven by vengeance. But he was not wholly alone. Holmes pulled from his jacket a folded paper, a confession penned by one whom suspicion had edged closer to in recent days. "This note," Holmes explained, "is from Dr. Mortimer." I stared, astonished. The doctor had maintained the facade of innocence, his presence steady throughout. Holmes continued. Mortimer, while loyal to his patient, was complicit in a darker design. His motives were far from benevolent. The doctor's knowledge of poisons and medical timings enabled him to administer the toxin with precision. His role was not just healer but executioner in disguise, seeking to preserve the family's reputation at any cost. Holmes unfolded the confession, reading passages aloud. "I did what was necessary to protect the Abernathy legacy. Edward's weakness threatened to unravel all. Crow's reckless vengeance endangered us all. I acted to control the damage." The room fell silent. I absorbed the magnitude. The doctor, entrusted to save lives, had orchestrated a lethal plan cloaked in duty, Holmes mused. Mortimer exploited the fears stirred by Crow's ghostly performances, assuming control behind the scenes. The poison, his knowledge, the locked room, a device to silence questions. The ghost boy, Crow's tragic mask manipulated by Mortimer's strategic hand. He concluded, "Together these men wove a tapestry of deceit from which only logic and perseverance could disentangle truth." The final confrontation led to Dr. Mortimer's arrest, his calm facade replaced by the stark realization of exposure. The family's legacy, once so carefully guarded by silence, now stood laid bare in daylight. Holmes, in his characteristically modest way, deferred praise. "It is not brilliance alone, Watson, but the careful assembly of detail and the relentless scrutiny of every shadow that reveals justice." As we bid farewell to the Abernathy estate, Holmes reflected on the cost of secrets and the price of silence. The ghost boy's tale, once spectral and mysterious, had become a somber testament to human frailty and the enduring quest for truth. Back at Baker Street, Holmes resumed his habitual calm. "Cases such as these remind us, Watson, that even ghosts are merely echoes of our own fears and failings, and only through reason, observation, and courage can we hope to lay such spirits to rest." The fire flickered low as night deepened, and the city carried on, its endless stories awaiting the sharp mind of the great detective, ever ready to listen beyond the silence for the whispers of truth.